Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reclaiming Soul Work podcast, where we are reclaiming the sacred in soul work for healers, practitioners, and social workers, one episode at a time. Um, I don't know. I'm excited. I'm Biani, and this is my co-host Sequoia. We are going to introduce again, but I just wanted to say how excited I was. This is episode 2 of our podcast, and we are so excited that you're tuning in. What we're going to talk about today is really how spirituality and social work go together, which really feels like a radical concept to some people, but to us, it just feels like a natural like soup. Like it kind of feels like natural to us. It was a very easy kind of melding together, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what drew us to the field. We're going to talk about sort of our practices, like our personal practices as spiritual social workers and spiritual therapists, and how that really informs our work. So again, we're so excited to have you here, episode 2. And I'm going to turn it over to my lovely friend, Sequoia.
Thank you so much and welcome, y'all. Reclaiming Soul Work is a heart centered podcast by two queer Black femme healers and spiritual social workers who explore the intersection of magic, spirituality, identity, and ancestral connections through the lens of tarot, divination, mysticism, mental health, and everything in between. As Biani mentioned, my name is Sequoia. I use she and her pronouns. I identify as a caregiver, a Mimi to my nephew, and so many things kind of in between. I want to give a land acknowledgement to the spaces where I occupy, work, and call home. So for me right now, that includes 3 different spaces, which is here in Anchorage, Alaska, on the Denaina land, Denver, Colorado, and then also Chicago. Um, I want to also acknowledge my ancestors that come from down south, Selma, Alabama, to be specific. I want to acknowledge the work that those that have come before me on that particular land have done and how that has informed and, really impacted not only, the way that I move through this life, but really this topic of spirituality and social work and how the two come together. So I'm really excited to talk more about that. And then I can share that I am an Aquarius sun and definitely like lean all the way into that Aquarius energy. And so whatever that means to you, that's what it means to me. So thank you so much. Biani, please, definitely.
I love that. I have so many Aquarians in my life, so I am not surprised that we are friends. I am not surprised that the universe and ancestors found a way to bring us together. My name is Biani Perez. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a doula, full spectrum doula. I'm a social worker, a proud bruja social worker. I'm a mama of 3. I'm a therapist in private practice, tarot practitioner, Reiki practitioner. I'm a sister, a friend, a daughter of I'm a proud daughter of first generation Dominican immigrants here in the US. I guess they would not be. I'm considered second generation, but I'm a child of immigrant parents, and that really does impact, has shaped how I've seen the world and how I live in the world and move through the world. I do want to acknowledge the land that I am working in and living in, which is Lenape. We call it in the US, they call it Philadelphia, but I want to acknowledge the Lenape tribe that are here. And I'm grateful, really grateful. And I was listening to you, Sequoia, and I was just sort of really like rooting myself into that, like acknowledging like where you live and play, right? And like how they're like three places. And that's important for us to remember, like this land is not ours, you know? And I'm grateful and holding in a lot of gratitude. Um, I also want to acknowledge my ancestry in a way, like it would be like the Caribbean, Dominican Republic. And I think I also want to claim like Muncie Lenape, which is also considered the Bronx. Like I would say my ancestors are there too. And I have a lot of love and sort of appreciation for my lineage. And then those that I don't know, you know, my ancestors of African descent who came to the Caribbean, whose names I don't know, but I hold them dearly. Um, and my sun sign is Virgo.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. I feel like I really more align more with my rising, which is Cancer. And I mean, I would say I'm definitely a Virgo and I'm a September Virgo. So for those who get that, y'all know what I mean. We could be a little intense as a bunch, but yeah, I would say like my Virgo sun and my Cancer rising are like really like a part of my life. Um, and yeah, whatever that means to y'all. Um, but yeah, I love how we bring ourselves into this. So I'm kind of sitting with that right now. Like, yes, this is who we are. Welcome,
Yeah.
y'all.
Yes, yes. Gratitude for the space to be able to, be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are really excited about, this week's topic. And I think everything that you just mentioned, Biani, is just beautiful related to transitioning into this topic. We were having a conversation about what brought us to this field and also how we encourage or reinforce spiritual practices with our clients. And so let's get into this topic this week about
Mm-hmm.
spirituality and how social work kind of go together for us. And so, yeah, how our practices have kind of evolved over time related to that, and reflecting more on, and I believe you brought this up, Biani, during our conversation, just that mind, body, spirit connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I can get into a little bit of that. I want to start definitely with just something that actually, let me say, I'm a social worker. I have my MSW and went to school for that. And throughout just my kind of evolution of like, what am I going to do with my life? I definitely didn't start out in social work. I have an art background. My first year of undergrad, I was in art school. At one point, I was in school to be a respiratory therapist. And then I ended up, kind of finishing my bachelor's in behavioral and social sciences. And when
Mm-hmm.
I got to that space, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I was considering like school social work while I was in undergrad, but didn't know if that's necessarily what I wanted to do. And so, yeah, I came to this conclusion, like I want to be in the helping profession. I just don't know, like what direction I want to go in. I know it's going to be social work, but I don't know, like what community I want to work with or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I finished up my MSW and, since then have just worked in a lot of different spaces around community mental health, school social work, but the kind of chunk of my experience has been, working with system involved families and folks. So I've worked, in different spaces with families, individuals, and youth that, have some type of interaction with child welfare, or, the criminal and juvenile legal systems, mostly all three, kind of going back and forth between those three
Mm,
systems. So, um, here I am now, I have a private practice and, work with clients, and it's been an interesting just place to come to, not only related to how I show up, with my clients, but then also, the interventions that I'm drawn to get more education on, the ways that I
mm,
incorporate, that information and that knowledge into sessions, but then also how that applies to myself. And so for me, I think that that is,
mm,
where I found myself bringing more spirituality in,
mm,
outside of just the kind of normal, or I don't know, track related, like educational opportunities, that I find
mm,
myself in, related to like DBT, CBT, like narrative therapy, like those types of interventions. I also found myself personally wanting more information and knowledge around ancestral and indigenous practices, that aligned with just the values that I knew that I grew up with and that were supportive to me. So
mm,
I, I grew up watching my mother be of service. My mom is a retired Chicago public school nurse, and she did that, you know, all while my sister and I grew up. And
mm,
she's, worked in nursing in different capacities, but that's my memory of the longest kind of setting that she's worked in. And so, outside of her work, being centered around taking care of folks' kiddos while they're in school, I watched her, take care of the elderly on the block that we grew up on. So my mother would cook for these folks. She would check in on them, related to healthcare and the things that they needed. She, was just that person that would knock on their door, make sure that they're doing okay, go visit them. And so that was the level of service, that I saw from her. And I hadn't really realized how much that impacted my values, until
mm,
I got more into not only community organizing, but then also, my own like spiritual practices and the things that, I connected to healing. The other thing that we grew up, and when I say we, I mean like me and my sister. I was a Girl Scout, throughout elementary school all the way into high school. Yeah, like that was an activity that we did. I grew up in the church, and that was an activity that um, we did on Saturdays. And that I have so many memories, about food drives and going to senior citizen homes and like making baskets for people, or, just being together with other girls that were my age. But then also, our troop leaders were people that were either affiliated, with the church that I kind of grew up in, but then we're also like friends of my mother. So there was this community kind of energy around
mm,
being together, learning about each other, but then also this reinforcement of values, that we take care of each other, no matter how little that we have, whatever that means, like I still have something to give and I want to do that. And so, yeah. I don't know. I talking about church and things like that is a topic for another day, but that was definitely the good aspects of that have definitely just translated into um that strong sense of community and being together and gathering with folks and
Mm,
cooking meals together and sharing and
mm.
so yeah, for me, like, that is, I guess, the connection around like spirituality and social work. What you think, Biani? What about you?
It's interesting. What was resonating with me as you were talking is
Hmm.
like, it's sort of how social work was like a natural path for you. And I think about my journey to social work. I feel like I was like launched into social work as a child of immigrant parents who, I learned English. And because I mastered that language so quickly, I was like naturally the interpreter in my family and helping folks get access to certain like
Hmm.
government benefits because, hey, Biani speaks English. And this was the 80s and 90s in the Bronx. And they didn't give us interpreters. We had to get our own, right? And like, there were ways that I really tried not to get into this field. like like my journey to social work was like a windy path. Like I
Hmm.
was the first in my family to go to college, and I wanted to be a teacher. I actually wanted to be a professor. And I went into this PhD program and realized it wasn't the right fit for me. Then I worked in nonprofits for 10 years. And then something happened. I was finally ready to do my healing work as a survivor. And who was my first therapist but a clinical social worker? And I didn't even know social workers could do therapy. It didn't occur to me that that was like a thing. I thought social workers were just case managers because that's what I experienced growing up. Like the social workers who helped us with our benefits as working class immigrant families, right? And I think that journey of really like starting my healing journey as a survivor made me feel like, wow, I think I can do this work. Like, I think I want to be a therapist. I want to help other survivors. And so my path was really windy, because in a lot of ways, I think to your point, like service has always been a part of it. And my family, like, and not just my family, but I grew up in a community where we were surrounded by single moms, Black and brown single moms who looked out for each other. And I would say, like, they were like naturally social workers. You know what I mean? Like, naturally people of service. So it was funny that I was like resisting the thing that was a part of my path. Like, it was always a part of my path. My sister's a social worker. My partner's a social worker. Then I became a social worker after them. Like, it was just like, you're supposed to do this. Like, my ancestors were like, you're supposed to do this, right? Um, and yeah, and what's funny too, I would say that, like, to me, the reason I chose social work and not like other professions, like whether it was counseling, psych, or master's like family and marriage therapy, and no diss to those other professions because I was seriously considering another field, but I felt like social work prepared you as a holistic practitioner. Like, social workers, we are trained to look at the person inside of their community, inside of their environment. I think about the person, the pie model, person and environment. Like, I've always felt like looking at the whole person meant looking at their community. And social work to me was like natural. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing social work. Like, no diss to these other professions, but that's just not my journey. That's not my path. And that's sort of, I would say, like, I was always like drawn to the field out of
Hmm.
necessity, because of service, because of what our community needed. And then also, yeah, like when it came to my healing, like I I I ended up like, oh wow, social workers can do this. Word, okay. Like, I want to be a social worker. Like, I want to be a clinical social worker, and it just felt really, yeah, it was like the natural path. But hearing you, it made me see, like, in a lot of ways, it's always been a part of my story. Like my origin story, like starts with that, the
Mm-hmm.
service and community
Mm-hmm.
support and collective care. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It's just so interesting, it's like a both and kind of situation, like you mentioned, it being a natural path and also it being windy, right?
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
I think about, I mentioned my mom and the elders, on my block, and I think about just the stories that my grandmother told, and also, my mom and my family told about just the service, that they all provided, but then also had access to, in Selma, Alabama. My family was a part of the civil rights movement, and that has just informed my approach to being available, also no matter how little, we have, that just being there for folks, in whatever capacity that you possibly can is super important and it's needed. And I think for me, that piece about social work, like that ties into that, because a lot of times our communities are, very poorly resourced, whether that be related to housing access or healthcare access or, food deserts and, just things like that. And so that community care, I feel like we've seen that more now, since we've been in the panini. There is this like just leaning all the way into community care, like for real,
Hmm.
and so I feel like that has just been really validating, related to the natural windy path, but
Hmm.
then also reinforces this piece, this piece of spirituality, and so yeah, yeah,
Yeah, maybe we could move into that, like how spirituality and social work intersect. because
okay,
the because the way I hear our origin story, spirituality was in all up in there. Like it's a part of our origin story, right? Like when I
yeah,
think about community care, that's a spiritual practice. I would argue, like to
yes, yes.
that's a practice of love, and love as a practice, as an ethic, as an ethos, as love. It's a spiritual practice. It's all spiritual. And so that's just like my little side ramble, but yeah, I think let's get into that. Like, how does spirituality, in our opinion, intersect with social work? I wonder how maybe you start.
Mhm.
You want to start?
Mhm. Sure. I want to continue what you were saying about love, and I know that we're going to get into this more, I believe on our next episode,
Hmm.
around, decolonizing our practices and things like that, you know, um, I feel like, that spirituality and social work kind of connection is at the foundation of decolonizing our practices, or my practice, to not look at someone in their situation or myself in the situation as, whatever might be coming up for me, as a product of just unprocessed trauma and things like that, right? Like, yeah,
Hmm.
it's unprocessed trauma and also, systemic injustice,
Hmm.
capitalism, patriarchy, misogynoir, homophobia, so yes, I do need to deal with my unhealed trauma. And also, like, some of this trauma is, based on the system that I live in, and to me, looking at someone with those eyes and working through, you know, whatever folks might be kind of coming to you for is that view of love, right? Because you're not
Mm,
pathologizing, you know,
mhm,
their situation. And so as I say that related to, you know, this external uh kind of context, I turn that inward to myself, you know, when
mm,
I'm having a hard day or, you know, when I'm doing shadow work or talking to my own therapist, you know, about the things that, you know, come up for me. I identify as a survivor as well. Yeah, I have PTSD related to emotional trauma, you know, from a variety of just different harm and violence, you know. And so, yeah, like even just looking at myself from that view of this is how, you know, those types of experiences are manifesting in my life. And also, you know, I'm
mhm,
also living in capitalism and homophobia and so on and so forth. And so my spiritual practice is bringing it back. I'm bringing it back. I'm bringing it back.
mhm,
So,
mm.
you know, thinking about um just my ancestral work, indigenous practices, you know, practices that align with, you know, just the values that my family have taught me. It all comes back to community care. It all comes back to service to others, you know. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like I know we're gonna get into like very specific, you know, kinds of things, but I didn't know, you know, if you wanted to kind of add something here before we get into that.
Yeah, yeah, I like to. I'm
Hmm.
really inspired. I'm inspired by what you're saying because part of what I'm hearing and that feels true to me too. And for those who are listening and watching, you know, we kind of haven't had this conversation. You know, we're having it in real time. So you all get to experience it. Because I think for us it's so embodied, right? Like the way that we think about spiritual social work, that having the conversation's helpful too. Because it's true, I agree. Like our my spiritual practice is with the intention of decolonizing, just like my social work practice. And when we're talking about spirituality, it's not this idea that it's like it's through an anti-colonial lens, it's through a decolonized lens, just like for us social work is too. And that is something we're going to talk about in the next episode, how we relearn, unlearn, learn, you know, like when we talk about spiritual social work. But yeah, like I agree. I think it's sort of connected to the title of our podcast. Like it's reclaiming the sacred from like our ancestral indigenous practices.
Yes.
And I'll take a step back to even argue that for me, and it was a big deal when I was in school, like in social work training, I had to heal and really like process a lot of trauma from my experience in social work because I came in with the idea that this work was sacred. Like I feel like community care is sacred work. It's spiritual healing. It's collective healing, you know. It's
Hmm.
feminist healing. Like to me it was all connected, intersectional,
Hmm.
intergenerational healing. And I was around folks who didn't like align with that. And it was very hard for me because I was just be like, this work
Yes.
is sacred. You're not taking it serious. Like, um, and yeah, I would say for me too, it's the same. Like when I think about spiritual social work, it is a practice that's ancestral, indigenous, intersectional, anti-capitalist, decolonial. Like that is that is how we like show up to the spiritual social work. Like that's how we think about our spiritual social work. It's not to say that those who define spiritual social work differently than us are not doing spiritual social work. We are just sharing with you all, grounding in our like our perspective around spiritual social work that is rooted in community care. It's rooted in love. I would say for me, it's rooted in like Bell Hooks's perspective of love. Like
Mhm.
it's the willingness to extend yourself for another person's growth and vice versa. And it includes care and respect and trust and commitment and really honoring a person's agency and strength. Like, I'm with you. I don't assume the people that I'm being of service to are broken. I don't believe in that. You are not broken. You are fully
That's
whole
right.
and you experience something really difficult in your life. because we live in this system that constantly traumatizes us. And, you know, a lot of my work is to be like, hey, you are whole and I see you, you know? And I think too, like when it comes to spirituality, like to me, spirituality is the practice of wholeness too, like helping
Mhm.
people reclaim themselves, reclaim the parts of them that they've lost. To me, that's spiritual social work, you know? Um, and it's like really looking at the whole person and looking at them in their environment and looking at them in their
Mhm.
community. And it's something that we talked before we went live, right? Like we were like, yo, like we got to really encourage some therapists and practitioners to stop looking at the people that they work with as a problem. Look at the system, right? You know, like we got to look at the system that we're in that's making us ill too. Like it's not
Absolutely.
like the intervention is not that our clients are the problem. The system that we're in is really flawed and making us sick, you know? And so yeah, and it's making me reflect around like when we think about spiritual social work, I think I want to add something because it just came to me now. It's like the mind, the body, the spirit, and the community connection. Like I feel like it's all of that, you know, like it's mind, body, spirit, but it's also community. And it's also like thinking about us ourselves as ecosystems. And it's also working with nature and acknowledging the land we're on and honoring the seasons of our lives, both personal and in like the sphere that we're in, you know? Like
Mhm.
I think our rhythm, our method of spiritual social work is all that and more. Some of it we can't even put into words, y'all. You know, like it's really deep. And we hope you can come along for this ride, you know, because like this is deep spiritual social work. It's not this whole like love and light kind of thing. It's deep,
Yes.
you know. We're not at the surface, y'all. Like this is deep work. um and we really want to reclaim the sacred, and the sacred is like honoring like what we've lost because of trauma.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
that's also what we're
Mhm.
trying to do here too, like reclaim what was lost or reclaim the parts that we forgot because we had to survive. That's spiritual to me too. That's holy.
Yes.
I don't want to offend people, but that's holy work right there.
Yes. It
um
is.
i'm
It
getting in
is.
my i'm getting in my feelings right now.
I know. I know. I know. I'm like blinking back. I
I got my
know.
crystals here. Like you know what? I called my ancestors and my guides today to like, you know, walk me through this conversation. And I think it's really important that we're doing this, but I also know that it's not what we've experienced in our lives as social workers. You know, like I'm holding that. That wasn't my experience when I became a social worker. And it took
That's
a lot of
right.
healing and unlearning
That's
and
right.
reclaiming.
I greatly appreciate you, for just your insight around this, the vulnerability, and also kind of bringing it back to this place of reclaiming. That is definitely a part of my practice, and when I think about this topic of spirituality and reclaiming, um, you know, capitalism capitalism is, just this interesting system to be in, because it makes us kind of go, right? Like not be in the present, really
Mm-hmm.
be in like future minds, the next paycheck, tomorrow, next month, next
Mm-hmm.
year, whatever future minded, kind of looks like for you. And so for me, with reclaiming and then this connection to spirituality and social work, like some of the things that have helped me to heal, and I'm just going to mention a few of them, have been really a nod to my ancestors, the elders that I grew up with, the values that my family have instilled in me. And it's really, things like storytelling. I always refer back to just the stories that my uncle and my aunts and my mom would tell me, not only about them kind of growing up, but about my grandmother, about my great aunts and uncles and how they survived, living
Mm,
in the deep South, places like, again, Selma, Alabama, Lowndes County, Birmingham, Mobile, Alabama. Like, this is where my roots are from, you know, um, pictures. I have so many pictures, here, and I can, when I'm down, I go to a
mm,
picture album and I look at,
mm,
pictures from when me and my sister were growing up, or pictures from, just my family, at different, like, holiday gatherings, and those things ground me. I think
mm,
about the meals that we shared. I have so many memories around peach cobbler recipes, and
mm,
just things like that. So those are those are some of the things that I talk to my clients about. Even if that wasn't a practice that they per se had in their families, there are some of those examples that translate in their lives, and they find grounding and peace in remembering those things even about
right.
themselves. I think about a client that I was doing um, some soul work with, some shadow work as well. And kind of like what we'll get into later in the episode around show and tell. In one of our sessions, one of her homework was, to bring and she was someone that really enjoyed adornment, so she had jewelry, from her
Mm,
grandmother. And so I told her, for our next session, bring some jewelry, and talk to me about, your grandmother and the stories, and when you got it, and, what outfits you used to wear it with, and, how you
I
feel
love
when you
that.
put this jewelry on, and so things like that,
Mm,
I lean all the way into those things with my clients, because those are the things that have sustained me. Those are the things that have reminded me of who I am, what love really is.
mm.
Um, yeah. Yeah, I could go on
I
and on and
love,
on about, like, yoga, and, like, all of, because that those things have been absolutely, just a part of my spiritual path too. But, for this talk right now, like, I just want to highlight those things.
I love that you talked about this as an ancestral practice. I just
Yeah.
want to just I really want to just really emphasize that this is such a beautiful practice of ancestral veneration and like connection. And I hope y'all listening, because you gave us like 3 or 4 gems, like the idea of like connecting with the photos and really like grounding yourself in that, thinking about adornment like as a pleasure practice, as an ancestral practice, like that's beautiful. And something I want to emphasize, because I didn't do that before, is that Sequoia and I really believe that when we're on this path of like spiritual social work, that it is important to center the folks you're working with, whether they're your clients, organizations, or systems. Like, ask them about their spiritual practice. What's their relationship to spirituality?
Yes.
And what's their relationship to religion, which is different than spirituality? But more so, we're interested in spirituality and like what their interests are around spirituality, what cultural practices they remember from their family of origin or their upbringing. You might have clients who are like, I'm really interested in astrology, or I'm interested in the stars and the planets, or I really love being outside in nature. Well, those are spiritual practices, right? Like, even
Absolutely.
a person's curiosity. And we think that stuff is important to center as you build a relationship with your clients, regardless of the setting that you're in, whether that's one on one, group, organizational work, whatnot. And we also think that it's important that as spiritual social workers, we center ourselves in our own practices too,
Mhm.
because we're not going to be able to really create that space for our clients if we don't do that for ourselves. So we want to share our practices too. And I'm so glad that Sequoia kicked it off for us, because there it's starting to kind of awaken in me like my own ancestral practices, like one of them being like cooking. Like, I
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, I don't live in New York. I'm from New York. I love it. I miss it. Don't want to live there though. but I think about my family, and when I miss them, I make like our Dominican meals, and that's the way that I connect to my children. Like I help them connect to their
Mhm.
Dominican heritage, and it's also how I connect with my ancestors. I think about my abuelas and the matriarchs in my family, and that's an energy practice. That is an ancestral practice. That is a spiritual practice, right? Or memories that I have. Like there are a lot of ways to practice to do ancestral work, and I don't really feel like in the spiritual kind of spaces we talk about that enough. I feel like
Mhm.
there's a particular way that people want you to do spirit like ancestral work, and I think we're always doing ancestral work, and we have to be really conscious of it too. Whether you're
Mhm.
calling out the elders, their names. Like I consider Audre Lorde one of my spiritual ancestors, and I connect with her as often as I can through her writing. I have an altar for her, and like I'm often thinking about like how she's shaped my life as a queer Black femme, and just she's an ancestor. She's also an ancestor. It doesn't have to be somebody you're quote unquote biologically connected to.
Yeah.
I think about the ancestors, the elders that I grew up with on my block, you know um, who weren't related to me, but they took care of me. They
Mhm.
parented me, right? And that's ancestral work too. And and community, right? Thinking about community, like how we hold ourselves and how we honor our ancestors who came before us. I also think thinking about ourselves, like what would it mean when we become ancestors? I think about that a lot. Like that's important to me, that sacred work, like the kind of ancestor I want to be, um,
Mhm.
for folks in my life. Um, yeah, I appreciate you really centering that, and really inviting us to expand the way we think about ancestral practice, because it's all around us. I also think about like Mother Earth, or Earth, not to gender or whatever, as like our largest ancestor in a way, like nature, like thinking about
Absolutely.
that,
Mhm.
like that is a practice too, and those are things that I talk to my clients about. Like sometimes my intervention with a client is to be like, have you been outside? Have you really connected with earth? Like I want you to try to ground if you can, come back to yourself, come back home, come back, connect with home, right? And
Yes.
um yeah, I think, yeah, that I think that's all important. Any other practices you want to share? Because yeah, I'm really, I feel so like hugged right now in a way. Like I feel like I'm feeling the presence, like this work that we do, um, this ancestral practice. Like I don't know, it was just really nice to hear you validate that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm grateful for you too, especially you sharing about Dominican food and passing those things down to your kiddos. That is so important, and I think also connects to the storytelling piece that I
Right,
mentioned,
right.
and the memories and which is so important. Um, I I feel like the pieces around community care as well just continue. All of these continue to be a common thread, you know, um, throughout our conversation. I I think the only other thing that I'll share, and then we can get into a little bit of our show and tell. My family is from the deep South, and I mentioned that I grew up in the church, and even though I don't really follow any type of religious practices, per se. In my adult life, yeah, well, we that's a whole nother thing. But one of the things that I do, um, and it's not synonymous with religion per se, but it's definitely just from that foundation. My family is a praying family.
Mm,
So I pray a lot. And, prayer for me looks like, you know, um, saying my ancestors' names, talking to them about the things that, I've been going through, where I feel like, I need them.
mm,
My father passed away quite a few years ago. And so I talk to him, all
mm.
the time in prayer, so that's just another practice, that's pretty personal. Um, but
I love that.
that's
I
just
love the
something else.
practice of like calling their names, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
calling their
It's
names,
so
like
important.
it's
It's
so
so
important. And like,
important
yes, it's so important. It's so important. Um,
because they don't, once they're gone, no one says their names. Like it
yes.
doesn't get spoken out, necessarily. So I feel like that's just, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, yeah. I actually it's funny. I really loved praying. When I was a kid, I grew up born and raised Catholic. Then my
Hmm.
family shifted to Pentecostalism. Like,
Okay.
and I was not with it. But I really loved as a kid, like praying to the like doing my Hail Marys. Like some like I even as
Mm-hmm.
a kid I remember ritual was so important. Like I loved ritual. I would like, do my Hail Marys. And I love the idea of like praying to like a mother figure, like the
Mm.
feminine. And so that doesn't seem like a surprise now, but yeah, like ritual was always so important to me. And it was so important to my ancestors. And ritual is important
Mhm.
to us. And that's something I often invite like folks I'm working with, like, what is your ritual, right? You don't realize it, but you're already doing ritual. So how can we
Absolutely.
how can we bring more intention into that, right? Um,
Absolutely.
I feel like maybe my form of prayer is meditation, I would
Mhm.
say for sure.
Mhm.
And I really am drawn to like I really love sacred energy work, also known as Reiki. I feel I feel things. Like I sense it in my body. I feel it before people speak to it. I am one who just like the energy is important. So that's something that I'm always like really connecting to. Like as my practice, like what am I feeling? What am I sensing? How do I, find my center? Um, and also thinking about the ecosystem, like our bodies as an ecosystem, and that we are a part of a larger ecosystem, and how everything I'm really committed to like finding the sacred in everything. And maybe that's
Yeah.
something that's more like animistic, but that everything has energy, and like that's just very important to me. Um,
Mhm.
and I would say tarot for sure, divination and like journaling, I think is really healing. It's something
Yes.
that I encourage my clients. And we'll talk in the future about how to use divination in your practices. But, we wanted to share like,
I
we
love
do it
that.
too, y'all. Like we
Yeah,
live
I
our
know
mind,
that's right.
but we do it too. And I think, it starts with us. It starts with us. If we are, if
Absolutely.
we are, we are on this path of spiritual social work, we have to do that work. And
Absolutely.
for Sequoia and I, it's like a daily practice. It's
Daily.
to me, it's like a part of me. It's a part of me. Um,
Mhm.
and you do it when you need it the most, and when you don't think you need it. That's how I always think. I'm like, it's always those days where I'm like, not. I have to be like, thank you, ancestors. I didn't really ask for help today, but I'm grateful.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so
I
yeah,
love that. I love that. Thank you so much,
thank
for
you, sis.
sharing more, about the practices, that have been supportive to you. And, I look forward to, us having more conversations around this. Because I feel like, we both have just shared in conversation one on one, more around our practices and specifically the ways that those have helped us to continue on a healing journey, right? And so we mentioned this the last time, and I really love this segment of our podcast, because I feel like this is also tied into, just concrete ways that our practices are utilized.
Hmm.
Some of the tools that we specifically use, on a daily
Hmm.
basis, the things that, have helped us to be sustainable, and how we can continue to be a resource and share with you all. And so, yeah, one of the things, that I just love and miss about elementary school is show and tell. I love to know about what others are playing with, what they bought recently, what's in their carts, what's on their bookshelves or coffee tables. And so, yeah, we are kind of in this place, where we want to share some things. And so, let's do a little show and tell, and tell about a resource. And do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first? I can
I
go
can
first.
go first. I feel like I
Okay,
should go
okay,
first,
yeah.
only
Yeah,
because
okay, good.
I like you to end with your
Okay.
resource.
Okay.
So yeah, like I love our segment of share and tell, because we also hope that it is a resource for you. So as we mentioned, we love divination, both of us as witches and stuff. And I love bibliomancy, where like I just pick a book and open a page and I know it's meant for me, right? And real talk, y'all, the book I wanted to share, I can't find it right now. And I'm saying that because I think it wasn't meant to be shared today. And so I asked for guidance, and I was told that I had to share this other book, which it's really lovely because it's by Thich Nhat Hanh, who recently passed away this year. Who I would
Mhm.
say is definitely a teacher of mine. I'm really drawn to like Dharma and Buddhism. That's definitely like it speaks to my soul, like Buddhism.
Mhm.
So it was really timely that this was what was I was invited to read. And again, bibliomancy, I opened the page and it was the page that was meant for us. And the message that came to me that I was called to share with us was thinking about compassion as a practice of
Mhm.
pleasure, a practice of self-care, and thinking about it as a spiritual practice. And that was so interesting and really divine, because this is the paragraph that I opened up to. So I want to read it to you all. And feel free to rewind this part because you might want to hear it again. And this section is called Deep Listening. Listening is an art we must cultivate. First, you have to be able to listen to yourself before you can listen to someone else. You must not run away from yourself, but rather be very compassionate toward yourself. The practice of mindfulness will generate the compassion you need to cradle your own pain and suffering. Then, when you begin to understand and love yourself, you are ready to understand and love another person.
Mhm.
And this is You Are Here, Discovering the Magic of the Present Moment by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Mhm. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Oh
you,
my
and thank you,
goodness.
ancestors. Yeah.
Yes, that is beautiful. I think, and so, just so spot on with our topic today. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much for sharing that. I love that. I don't have that book and I need to get it. So thank
Yeah,
you for that resource.
we're also bibliophiles here, so
Yes, yes, we
we love
are.
sharing books. But yeah, just to remind people too, like with bibliomancy, it is a form of divination. Like it doesn't have to just be cards, but a lot of times I'm asking for support and guidance, and you'll get the message when you call for it. So that's another way
Yeah,
to practice too.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so, so much. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, what I have for share and tell this week is a deck. And you mentioned journaling earlier, related to a practice, and I can go on and on and on about journaling. So I'm so
Mm-hmm.
grateful that you brought that up because again, it just ties right into this deck. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is the okay, how do I want to talk about it? So, okay, journaling is a practice, and then color color healing has been
Mm.
like huge for me. That is definitely just like one of the ways that I get messages and ways that I feel like my ancestors connect to me is through colors. And so this deck
Mm.
is a combination of the both. It is the therapeutic color and journal prompt deck by Magically Bree. And
Oh.
I really like her because she has quite a few decks out, and they're really cool, very creative, very imaginative. But this deck is, let's see, how can I don't know if you can really see because it's also like upside down and all the things. But it has different colors. It's really hard to see. I'm sorry. This is not a good way to show
That's
this
okay. We'll
because
also try to include a link in the description so
yeah,
y'all can
yeah.
click on. No worries. Yeah.
But so I can show it like this. But so it has
Oh, I
just
love that.
different kind of shades and colors. And on each one, it gives you the color, it gives you a journal prompt, and then a regular
Mm.
or a theme, if you will. And so, yeah, so I'll just read one like color, ruby red, journal prompt. If you could have a superpower, what would it be? And then the
Mm.
theme is embrace your personal power. So, you know, one of these a day is really cool. Um, I also use these with my clients across the lifespan. My kiddos love these cards. I love using these with kids, especially
Mm.
those that, you know, sometimes we have those kiddos that come into sessions and it's kind of hard for them to just begin talking about anything. And so a lot of times what I'll ask them, you know, we'll pull a journal prompt together. I'll ask them
Mm.
to not necessarily do like full sentences. Like I love word associations and then, you know, things that just words or phrases that just come immediately. And then that'll be a way for us to start our session. And I've used that same technique like with, you know, my adult clients. Kiddos aren't the only ones that have, you know, a hard time sometimes when you come in the session. It's like, oh, what do I got to talk about today? You know,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah,
I
I
love
love
that.
these. Yeah, I love these for myself. Like sometimes it's just fun to, you know, like on a Saturday morning, just pull a card and journal a little bit. A lot of the prompts are different in the sense that, you know, they pull from different energies and ask you questions around maybe topics that, you know, you hadn't considered or hadn't reflected on in a
Mm.
bit. So, yeah, and
I
then the
love
colors
that.
are cool. Yeah, so that's my Sharon tale.
Oh, thank you, Sequoia.